Okay, I just wanted to make a video here explaining my library and framework that I've been working on a month or so ago. It's Access.js, and what it is actually a game engine for JavaScript using the Canvas API in HTML5. But it's the cool thing about this system is I tried a new pattern that I haven't ever explored before. I was told about it by a coworker, and I did some research on it. I was like, hey, this pattern is actually really powerful, and I didn't understand its full potential until I started using it, and then it was evident like entity component system is really effective, especially in for something like a game engine. And it's not super common. As I was doing my research, there wasn't a ton on it, so I kind of had to play around with it and find out stuff as I went. But I'll kind of go through and explain what an entity component system is if you're not sure, or if you've never heard of that pattern, or you don't know what it is, as I go along and I explain how the game engine works. So as you can see here in Access.js, there's this game that you can new up and you can create, inherit from a game object. And what that has on it is a delta time and a tick. So that's all for the game loop. And then it has a world object, sprite sheets, an array of cameras, and an array of systems. And I'll kind of break this out. These are the main points of the game, obviously being on the game object. And then I have a bunch of helper methods here, and we'll kind of go through those as we go. But the main thing that we want to look at is root entity. So what a root entity is, this is actually a tree structure of entities. So an entity is any type of game object. If it's a player, if it's a tree, if it's a bullet, a wall, all of those are game objects, and they will be put into an entity. They'll be inherited. We'll create a new entity, and that will be an entity, and it will be a child of the root entity. So whenever I want to access objects, game objects in the game, I go to world and then root entity. So let me show kind of what an entity is. An entity, each entity is given a unique ID, a type, and then it's assigned a parent. Right now I have it to where the parent is the root entity. Eventually I'll add support so that you can have children of children of children, and it'll keep going. And so like this. So each one has an array of children and components. The biggest thing here on the entity that we need to focus on is components. So it's entity, component, system, and components. You have entities, components, and systems. Those are the biggest things, and obviously in the pattern. An entity, obviously, like we were talking about, is a game object, and the components. An entity has an array of components, so it's composed of. An entity is really just composed of a bunch of components. So you might ask, what's a component? The difference between a component and a system is a component, all it has is data. It's just data. So this is a little bit different than, traditional object-oriented programming, where you might create a class and you have objects and functions all in the same class. This idea is to separate data from functionality. So your systems do all of your functionality, and your components are just data, and we act upon that data. So for example, a player could have a position component, and all that is an XY coordinate. Each component, as you notice, will have an isActive attribute and a type. This is just for when we're going through. If we want, throughout your game, you can make certain components not active so that the systems don't act upon them. And then the type is obviously more for the engine to pay attention to. But so in this one, you have an XY. We also have like a size, which is just a width, height. All it is data. That's the main thing. A sprite, image, state, an object of different states that it can have, velocity. So the main thing, like I said, with components, it's all about data. And the way we act upon that data is through systems. So let me go through a system here. We can look at a keyboard input system here. A keyboard input system keeps track here of some data, but what we're doing is we're acting upon data that's from the components. So each system in my Active.js library here has an activate function and an update function. Activate is ran one time, and update is ran every single time through the game loop. So every 16.7 milliseconds for 60 frames per second. And so on activate, all I do is I come through, I'll set up some event listeners here in this example. And then on activate, I'll set up, say, my game. I pass in my game, so now I have reference throughout this system to the game, and then I set it's ready to true. The reason why I do this is when you set up a game, you'll load in all of your systems, and they need to run through, and I'm not going to start the game loop until every single system is ready. This was key in like my sprite sheet system when we're loading in images. I didn't want to start the game until we knew for sure that all the images were available, or else obviously our game wouldn't work. So that happens on activate here in the sprite sheet image or sprite sheet system. And then I have a keyboard system, a render system, so this is drawing to the canvas, a rigid collision system. This is just all the code for detecting collisions between entities. Sprite sheet, we kind of went over that, just adding sprite sheets, and then state system, so dealing with states of entities. So this is where all the functionality happens. I wanted to go into game. So what happens is on the game object, we have a pause and play. So the play runs the loop. This is the game loop. And all we're doing is we're saying, okay, we're setting the delta time or whatever, getting the ticks, and we're running this loop trying to do it with request animation frames so that it goes every 16.7 seconds if possible. And then we update systems. So what update systems does is we go to our game object and we have an array of systems here. And all I'm doing is they're set in the order that we were given when you create a game. And I just loop through those and I call the update on every system that I'm given. So now it's going to be in order. So the way a game engine would work is you would want your keyboard input first, then you would want to handle like your movement, collision, and then rendering after. And it will just loop through those systems in the order that they're given. And I'll go ahead and leave a link to this code on my website underneath this video if you're watching it on my website. And also on my website there, I have on my portfolio, I created a simple game as a brick breaker game using the Axis.js just to have a proof of concept and show how it can be used in an example. So if you want to go ahead and poke through the code, go ahead. Like I said, I wrote it probably like a month ago or so. I created a couple of games from it and haven't looked at it too much since then because I've been busy at work. But if you want to poke around the code, give it a try, give me some feedback, that would be awesome. And yeah, if you have any questions, let me know later.